Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let me say this. I know the public hears of names that are on the tip of the tongue in the light heavyweight division. Right? Names like Sir Jack Kovalev, names like Adonis Stevenson, right? And I understand that we all get excited. I know the same took place at super middleweight, where we heard of names like Arthur Abraham, right? A few years ago, back when they had the tournament that Andre Ward won. But I'm just here to tell you that looking at film, Sullivan Barrera is going to be one of the toughest opponents of Andre Ward's career, right? Let's keep in mind, an argument can be made that Ward's biggest victory to date was over Chad Dawson, right? Would it surprise you to know that both of these guys have beaten Chad Dawson? Sullivan Barrera actually beat Chad Dawson in the amateurs. In fact, believe it or not, Chad Dawson is not the only light heavyweight champion Sullivan Barrera has beaten. He also beat Beibut Shumenov in the amateurs. Right? Keep in mind, this is a guy who stopped as a professional. Jeff Lacey. I know Jeff Lacey was faded at the time, but he got stopped, right? That fight was a mismatch. Now, the warning signs are all around. Sullivan Barrera trains with Gennady Golovkin under the tutelage of Abel Sanchez. In other words, he has a world-class trainer. He's been in the ring with one of the best fighters pound for pound in the sport in training. More importantly, he has a great long right hand. It's spectacular, right? He can hit you with it. It's pretty straight. It dazes opponents. He can slip it into cracks. In other words, an opponent has his hand up like this, right? Barrera's the kind of guy who can get the punch in right here, right? He doesn't need things to be pristine and wide open, right? He's a guy who can hit you in a snowstorm. More importantly, though, in addition to his ring coverage, right, ability to land that right hand from way out, he can actually step in the pocket. He has an inside game. He can shorten his punches. Right now, he's 34 years old. He's a Cuban defector. No one's given him anything, right? He's been fighting for years, rising up through the ranks. He firmly believes that it's his time. He's not talking about edging Andre Ward on the scorecards. Rather, he's firmly saying in interviews, I'm expecting to get a stoppage, right? In fact, he's telling people he expects to get the stoppage by about round number 9. Now, make no mistake, Andre Ward is one of the very best in boxing. I've said here online that I feel with his skill set, I think he could beat, quite frankly, heavyweight champion Deontay Wilder. I know people say Dwyer's crazy and stuff like that. Yeah, sure, I am crazy, right? But in my life, I've also seen Roy Jones beat the heavyweight champ, James Toney beat the heavyweight champ, Ray Leonard come out of retirement, right, 3 years outside the ring and beat the reigning middleweight champion, right, a division Ray wasn't even really a member of. Let's just say this is boxing. In my life, I've seen stranger things happen. Right? Andre Ward on his A game is awfully tough. Right? He's an elite. Really, some of his biggest fights weren't close. His biggest win over Chad Dawson wasn't close. Chad Dawson hits the canvas several times in that fight. His fight over Mikkel Kessler wasn't close, right? He completely dominated Mikkel Kessler. Other names, Edwin Rodriguez, people thought he was the future. I'm just here to tell you that Andre Ward beat him, and Ward wasn't even healthy. Understand, Ward's been fighting with an injured shoulder that's now been surgically fixed. Here's the concern, and it is a concern. Andre Ward has only fought once in a very long period of time, right? The injuries are there. The shoulder problem that bothered him for several fights gets surgically fixed. Understand, he was supposed to be on the undercard of Miguel Cotto, Saul Alvarez, and had to pull out because of pain in a knee. The guy he fought in his last fight, and understand his last fight was about a year ago, was Paul Smith, who really isn't elite at this stage of his career. Right? Paul Smith really didn't push Andre Ward. Understand too, Andre's in a new division. Right? The Ward we remember is the Ward from 168 pounds. Now Andre is up at 175 pounds. Right? In my opinion, there's uncertainty there. Right? We really are looking at this fight. And the question is, simply put, is Andre Ward still Andre Ward? Right? He's in a new division, and he's against a hungry, older, unbeaten, like Ward is unbeaten, opponent who has been in the ring with top-flight talent and who has certain skills that will allow him to fight both outside and inside. Right? So, let's just say I'm expecting a lot to happen in this fight. Let's talk about Barrera. Here are the things I simply don't know. Right? Barrera looks good when he hits you from outside. Then he jumps inside. It's kind of like a David Haye dynamic. Right? He hits you from outside. Think Haye against Enzo Maccarinelli. Then he jumps inside. Then he's battering you on the inside. Right? The million-dollar question, I'm sure it's one Andre and his people have thought about, is what happens if Ward's the one who is pushing the issue inside? Right? Can Sullivan Barrera deal with a guy who's offensive with him on the inside? Can he fight inside when he's forced to back up? Can he fight inside when he's not the one taking the lead? That's an open question. Right? I'm not sure if we know the answer to that. Right? Also, I do consider Sullivan Barrera to be much better than Paul Smith. Right? Ward hasn't fought this level of competition for several years. Right? Is he at the top of his game right now after the layoff? Or are we going to see rust? So let me say this. Right? Understand, this is a gambling channel. Right? I personally feel Andre Ward is an elite fighter. If Ward blows out Sullivan Barrera, I'll have no hesitation calling him the best in the sport, pound for pound. Right? That's how dominant he is. But, and there's a but, let me underline it, but I don't like these odds. Right? Sullivan Barrera right now, believe it or not, is a 5 or 6 to 1 underdog. I don't like that. Right? To me, the value bet here, the value side of the play, is with Sullivan Barrera at 5 or 6 to 1. Right? Why? Because, quite frankly, he's an unbeaten fighter who's fought top-level talent, granted some of it as an amateur, and he's catching Andre Ward at a time where Ward hasn't been fighting on a regular basis. Right? So the value side of the play, even though I believe Ward might be the best in the sport pound for pound, in my opinion, is on Sullivan Barrera getting, let's say, 5 to 1 odds. Let me go one step further. Right? I believe somebody gets stopped in this fight. One of the stories of this fight, in my opinion, is Andre Ward's right hand. Understand, those of you relying on old film of Ward need to realize that he's heavier, he's stronger, his right hand now is healed. Right? That Paul Smith fight, there are moments in that fight where Andre Ward flashes that right hand. By the way, that fight did not go the distance. Right? It did not go the distance. Understand, Andre Ward, who stayed at 168 a very long time, might actually have a great full body now that he's able to gain 7 more pounds, right? 168, 175. He might be a different fighter. He might be a power puncher, right? I'm expecting someone to get stopped in this fight. I think the over-under is a little bit high, right? The over-under is 10.5 rounds. That means the fight has to go past the midway point of the 11th round, right? 10 full rounds, then half of the next round, right? For you to lose the bet. So, the parts of this that intrigue me are the skewed odds on Sullivan Barrera, right? Sullivan Barrera at 5 to 1. That sounds good to me. Not that I believe Sullivan Barrera is going to win the fight. Just that this is well north of even money. I'm getting an unbeaten fighter who trains with Golovkin, right? A Cuban defector who was a world-class amateur, right? A guy who's 34 years old and is not going to be intimidated by fighting in Oakland, California, right? Sullivan Barrera, 5 to 1. Hedged with the under 10.5 rounds, right? That's kind of how I'm going with this fight. But understand the risk involved, and folks, it's high risk. If Andre Ward wins a decision, right? Andre Ward has a crowd-friendly style. Some of Andre Ward's biggest fights ended by decision. Andre Ward over Carl Froch, for example, ended by decision, right? If Andre Ward wins this fight by decision, you lose it all, right? If he gets the knockout inside of the halfway point of the 10.5 rounds, you win a bounty, right? So, this is high risk. I don't recommend it for anyone other than seasoned, really professional gamblers. But if I had to hedge this play, I think about Sullivan Barrera at 5 to 1. If lightning strikes, I want the payout, right? Hedged with the under 10.5 rounds, right? I wouldn't think about taking Sullivan Barrera if this fight were even money. But if you're going to give me 5 to 1 odds, you're compensating me for the risk. And as I said earlier in this video, if Andre Ward comes out and looks dazzling against this opponent, understand this opponent is better than many of the guys who are in the public consciousness. I wouldn't hesitate to take Sullivan Barrera over Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Right? Quite frankly, Sullivan Barrera, to me, is someone I'd likely take over Adonis Stevenson. Right? Understand, if Andre Ward comes out and looks great and dominates Sullivan Barrera, then in my book, he will be the best pound for pound in the sport. Right? This guy, simply put, does it all. As I like to say, back in the day, I watched a few Andre Ward films. I couldn't even tell if the guy was left-handed or right-handed in real life. That's how fluid Andre Ward is. I personally consider Ward against Mikhail Kessler to be a masterpiece fight. Kessler couldn't fight inside. Ward knew it. That fight was lopsided. Contrast Kessler in that fight to Kessler against Carl Froch twice. Right? I think Ward and his trainer Virgil Hunter are master strategists. I think Ward is a guy who can change up things. I think Ward gets bored in fights, and literally in the later rounds, fights like the Edison Miranda fight, just decides, hey, I'm going to fight a different style here just for the hell of it. I believe that's how talented he is. But he's in against the kind of hungry fighter who, in my eyes, should never get the kind of long odds that Sullivan Barrera is getting for this fight. And I've got to chase the value. Anyway, that's how I see it. This fight is a must-watch. Let me hear from you. Leave your comments for me here. Visit us at gamblersadvisory.com. Thanks for stopping by.